They seated me in the back row of my own husband's funeral. Not in the front where wives belong, not even in the second row where close family sits, but in the very back next to the caterers and late arrivals as if I were an afterthought. An inconvenience? A stranger who'd wandered in off the street? My name is Gloria Westfield Hamilton. I'm 59 years old, and for the past 12 years I've been called every name in the book by my husband's children. Gold digger, homewrecker, trophy wife, opportunist, manipulator. They never bothered to learn who I really was, and that, as it turned out, was their most expensive mistake. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the day I met Richard Hamilton, and show you exactly how a so-called gold digger ended up teaching 3 entitled adults the most expensive lesson of their lives. The first time I saw Richard Hamilton, he was arguing with a parking attendant outside the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan. It was pouring rain, and he'd apparently parked in a loading zone while running in to grab his forgotten reading glasses from the coat check. "Sir, I'm just doing my job," the attendant was saying, water dripping from his cap. Richard, drenched and exasperated, was fumbling with his wallet. I was gone for 3 minutes. 3 minutes, I was standing under the museum's awning, watching this scene unfold, and something about it made me smile. Here was a man clearly successful, given his expensive overcoat and the way he carried himself, completely undone by a $50 parking ticket. "Let me," I said, walking over and handing the attendant my credit card. "Consider it a random act of kindness." Richard turned to me, rain dripping from his silver hair, and for a moment he just stared. "I can't let you do that." "You can and you will," I said, signing the receipt. "Now get out of the rain before you catch pneumonia." He didn't move, just stood there studying my face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "At least let me buy you coffee, it's the least I can do." That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekend museum visits. And 6 months later, Richard Hamilton, widower, father of 3, chairman of Hamilton Industries, asked me to marry him. "My children won't approve," he said that night, holding my hand across the table at our favorite Italian restaurant. "They're still mourning their mother. It's been 4 years, but to them, it might as well have been yesterday." "I'm not trying to replace her," I said gently. "I could never replace her. I'm just trying to love you." He smiled, that warm, crinkly-eyed smile that had made me fall for him in the first place. "Then marry me anyway. Let them come around in their own time." So I did. What Richard didn't know, what his children certainly didn't know, was that I didn't need his money. I had my own. The first time I met Richard's children was at his penthouse apartment in Upper East Side, Manhattan. He'd invited them for Sunday brunch to introduce us. I dressed carefully that morning, nothing too flashy, a simple navy dress, pearl earrings, minimal makeup. I wanted them to see me as I was. A woman who loved their father, not a caricature of what they expected. Victoria arrived first. She was the oldest at 42, a corporate attorney with her mother's sharp features and her father's business mind. She walked in wearing a designer suit and carrying a Birkin bag, her handshake cold and perfunctory. "So you're the woman my father's been hiding from us," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I'm Gloria. It's wonderful to finally meet you." "Is it?" She sat down, crossing her legs with deliberate precision. "Tell me, Gloria, what do you do?" "I'm semi-retired. I used to run my own business." "Used to," she emphasized the words. "How convenient, and now you've found someone to take care of you." Richard's jaw tightened. "Victoria, it's fine," I said quietly, placing my hand on his arm. I looked at Victoria directly. "I understand you're protective of your father, that's admirable, but I'm not what you think I am." "Really? Then what are you?" Before I could answer, the door opened and Richard's 2 sons walked in. Marcus, 40, and James, 37. They looked like younger versions of their father, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same penetrating gaze. Marcus barely glanced at me. James didn't even try to hide his disdain. "Dad," Marcus said, ignoring me completely, "can we talk?" "Privately, anything you need to say, you can say in front of Gloria," Richard replied firmly. Marcus's face hardened. "Fine, we think you're making a mistake. You barely know this woman." "She's half your age." "She's 59, Richard corrected. "I'm 71, that's 12 years, not half." "Whatever the number is, it's suspicious. Mom hasn't even been gone 5 years. "Your mother has been gone 4 years and 7 months, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "I loved your mother with everything I had, but she's gone, and I'm still alive. Am I supposed to spend the rest of my life alone to prove something to you? The room went silent. Victoria finally spoke, her voice ice cold. Do what you want, Dad, but don't expect us to play happy family with your midlife crisis. They left before brunch was even served. Richard sank into his chair, looking suddenly older than his years. I'm sorry you had to see that. I knelt beside him, taking his hands in mine. Richard, listen to me. I don't need their approval. I just need you. They'll come around, he said hopefully. They just need time. But I knew better. I'd seen the look in Victoria's eyes, the disgust in Marcus's voice, the contempt in James's silence. They weren't protecting their father. They were protecting their inheritance. We married quietly 3 months later at City Hall. Just us, 2 witnesses and a judge who smiled kindly as Richard slipped the ring on my finger. You look happy, the judge said afterward. I am, Richard replied, kissing my hand. For the first time in years, I really am. His children didn't attend. They didn't even acknowledge the wedding. When Richard called to tell them, Victoria hung up. Marcus sent a one-line text. Congratulations on your mistake. James didn't respond at all, but Richard was happy, and that was enough for me. What his children didn't know was that before the wedding, I'd insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Gloria, I don't need a prenup, Richard had protested. Everything I have is yours. And everything I have is mine, I replied calmly. Richard, I'm not marrying you for your money, so let's make that clear from the start. Separate finances, what's yours stays yours, what's mine stays mine. He'd looked at me with such wonder. You're serious? Completely. I want your children to have no ammunition. I want them to know I'm here because I love you, not because I want access to your bank account. So we signed it. A completely separate property agreement. My assets stayed in my name, his stayed in his. We split household expenses 50-50. I even paid for half of our honeymoon to the Amalfi Coast. Not that his children ever bothered to find out. The 12 years I spent with Richard were the happiest of my life. We traveled Paris, Tokyo, Barcelona, Cape Town. We attended symphonies and art gallery openings. We volunteered at the local food bank every Saturday morning. We fostered rescue dogs and donated to children's hospitals. I watched Richard mentor young entrepreneurs through his foundation. I saw him light up when he talked about innovative startups and creative business solutions. He was brilliant, generous, and kind, and his children saw none of it. They stopped calling, stopped visiting. Every holiday invitation we extended was declined. Every attempt Richard made to bridge the gap was rejected. Give them time, I kept telling him, but time only made it worse. Victoria was the worst. She'd call Richard's office demanding to speak with him about family business, but the moment she heard I was in the room, she'd hang up. She sent birthday cards addressed only to Richard Hamilton, never Richard and Gloria. Marcus was more passive-aggressive. He'd forget to include me in family emails. When Richard was hospitalized briefly for a minor procedure, Marcus called everyone in the family except me. And James pretended I didn't exist. He'd show up at Richard's office unannounced, walk right past me if I was there, and act as if I were invisible. They're afraid, Richard said one night after another failed attempt to reconcile with Victoria. Afraid that if they accept you, they're betraying their mother? Or afraid I'm after their inheritance, I said quietly. He didn't deny it. But here's what they never knew: I didn't need their inheritance. I had plenty of my own. Before I met Richard, I was Gloria Westfield, founder and CEO of Westfield Analytics, a data analysis firm I'd built from nothing in my garage 30 years ago. I'd started the company when I was 29, fresh off a divorce from my first husband and determined to never depend on anyone again. I worked 16-hour days, lived on ramen and coffee, and slowly, painfully built a business that revolutionized how companies analyzed consumer behavior. By the time I was 45, Westfield Analytics was valued at $200 million. I sold it when I was 53 for $340 million. After taxes, investments, and setting up a charitable foundation, I walked away with a personal net worth of approximately $180 million. I'd retired, moved to Manhattan, bought a modest brownstone in Greenwich Village, and spent my days volunteering, taking art classes, and deciding what to do with the rest of my life. That's when I met Richard. I never told him about the money, not because I was hiding it, but because it never came up. He never asked what I did before we met. He never questioned how I could afford to split expenses on luxury trips. He just assumed I was comfortable, maybe a successful professional who'd saved well, and I let him assume it. Because for the first time in my life, I was loved for who I was, not what I had. His children, of course, saw a middle-aged woman with no apparent career, no visible wealth, no obvious pedigree. They saw exactly what they wanted to see, a gold digger, and I let them think it. Because I knew eventually the truth would come out. I just didn't know it would be at Richard's funeral. Richard's stroke happened on a Tuesday morning. We were having breakfast. He was reading the financial section of the Times. I was sketching in my art journal when his face suddenly went slack on one side. "Richard," I said, standing up so quickly my chair fell over. He tried to speak, but the words came out garbled. His right arm hung limp. I called 911 immediately. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes. By the time we got to the hospital, Richard was unconscious. Massive ischemic stroke, the doctor told me in the ICU waiting room. "We're doing everything we can, but the damage is extensive." "Can I see him?" "Of course. You're his wife. You're the only one who can make medical decisions for him." I sat by his bedside for 3 days straight, holding his hand, reading to him from his favorite books, playing the jazz music he loved. His children came, finally. Victoria arrived first, her face pale and drawn. She walked past me without a word and stood on the opposite side of Richard's bed. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. Marcus and James arrived together. They acknowledged me with the barest nod, then focused entirely on their father. On the 4th day, Richard's doctor pulled me aside. "Mrs. Hamilton, I need to be honest with you. His brain activity is minimal. Even if he wakes up, the quality of life would be severely compromised. Have you discussed his wishes?" "He has a living will," I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. "He didn't want to be kept alive by machines if there was no hope of recovery." Victoria, who'd been eavesdropping, exploded. "You want to kill him?" "I want to honor his wishes," I said quietly. "His wishes," she laughed bitterly. "You've known him 12 years, I've known him my entire life. Don't you dare pretend you know what he'd want." "I know because he told me, and it's in his living will, which he wrote before I ever met him. You can read it if you'd like." She read it. They all did. And it said exactly what I told them. If there was no reasonable hope of meaningful recovery, Richard did not want to be kept alive artificially. The decision was mine to make legally as his wife and medical power of attorney. I made it. They turned off the machines on the 5th day. Richard died peacefully that evening, with me holding his hand and his children standing on the other side of the room, watching me with hatred in their eyes. The funeral was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan. Richard had been a prominent businessman, a philanthropist, a mentor to hundreds. Over 1,000 people attended. His children planned everything. They didn't ask for my input. They didn't include me in any decisions. They didn't even tell me what time the service started. I had to call the funeral home myself. When I arrived, dressed in a simple black dress and Richard's favorite pearl necklace, a gift from him on our 5th anniversary, a young man in a dark suit stopped me at the door. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but family seating is reserved." "I'm his wife," I said quietly. He looked uncomfortable. I was instructed to seat you in the back." I could have fought it, could have made a scene. Could have demanded my rightful place in the front row. Instead, I smiled. "The back is fine." I sat in the last row, next to a kind elderly woman who introduced herself as Richard's former secretary. "They should be ashamed of themselves," she whispered to me, glaring at Victoria in the front row. "Richard loved you more than life itself. Everyone who knew him knew that." The service began. Speaker after speaker talked about Richard's brilliance, his generosity, his legacy. Then Victoria stood up to give the eulogy. "My father," she began, her voice clear and strong, "was a man of integrity. A man who built his empire from nothing through hard work and dedication. A man who loved his family above all else." She paused, looking directly at me. "In his final years, my father made some choices that were difficult for those of us who loved him most. He was vulnerable after our mother died. And there are people in this world who prey on vulnerable men. People who see opportunity where they should see grief." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned to look at me. She continued. "My father was many things, but he was not a fool. And we, his children, will make sure that his true family, the family that stood by him his entire life, is protected. We will contest any attempt to manipulate his legacy." She sat down to scattered applause. I didn't move, didn't react, just sat there with my hands folded in my lap, my face calm, because I knew something Victoria didn't. I knew exactly what was in Richard's will, and I knew exactly what was coming next. The reading of the will took place 1 week later at the law offices of Patterson, Sterling and Associates, Richard's attorneys for over 30 years. Walter Patterson himself, a distinguished man in his 70s, sat at the head of the conference table. Victoria, Marcus, and James sat on one side. I sat on the other alone. "Before we begin," Walter said, looking at me with kind eyes, "Mrs. Hamilton, are you comfortable proceeding without your own legal counsel present?" "I'm fine, thank you," I replied. Victoria scoffed. "Of course she's fine. She's about to rob us blind." Walter ignored her and opened the will. "The last will and testament of Richard James Hamilton," he began. "Being of sound mind and body, I hereby declare this to be my final will, revoking all previous wills and codicils." He read through the preliminaries, then got to the meat of it. "To my beloved children, Victoria, Marcus, and James, I leave my shares in Hamilton Industries, to be divided equally among the three of you. Additionally, I leave you each a trust fund of $2 million, to be accessed upon your 50th birthday or earlier under conditions specified in the trust documents." Victoria's face brightened. Marcus and James exchanged satisfied looks. Walter continued. "To my wife, Gloria Westfield Hamilton, I leave my personal residence in Manhattan, my collection of artwork, my vehicles, and the remainder of my liquid assets, estimated at approximately $15 million. Victoria shot to her feet. $15 million? That's highway robbery. We're contesting this. On what grounds? Walter asked calmly. Undue influence. She manipulated him. She isolated him from his family. She, Miss Hamilton, Walter interrupted, his voice firm. Please sit down, let me finish. She sat, but her face was red with fury. Walter looked directly at me. Mrs. Hamilton, your husband also left you this letter to be read aloud in the presence of his children. May I? I nodded, my throat tight. He opened the envelope and began to read. My dearest Gloria, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone and you're sitting in a room with 3 people who probably hate you. I'm sorry for that. You deserved better. I want my children to know this. Gloria never asked me for anything. Not once in 12 years. When I tried to buy her expensive jewelry, she said no. When I tried to add her to my bank accounts, she refused. When I wanted to buy her a car, she insisted on paying half. She is the most independent, dignified, principled woman I've ever known, and I loved her more than I can express. Victoria, Marcus, James, I love you all, but you treated Gloria with cruelty and contempt, and that broke my heart every single day. You judged her without knowing her, you assumed the worst without asking questions. I hope after I'm gone you'll take the time to learn who she really is. Because if you do, you'll realize what I knew. She didn't need my money. She never did. All my love, Dad. The room was silent. Victoria's hands were shaking. Marcus was staring at the table. James's face had gone pale. That's it, Victoria finally said, her voice hollow. That's his justification for giving her everything? Miss Hamilton, Walter said quietly, your father left you and your brothers the company. The business your grandfather started that your father built into an empire. That's worth approximately $400 million. Each of you will inherit roughly $130 million worth of shares plus $2 million in cash. He paused. Your father left Mrs. Hamilton a house, some art, and $15 million, hardly everything. But Victoria wasn't listening. She was staring at me with pure venom. We're contesting this, she said flatly. We'll prove she manipulated him. We'll show the court that she isolated him from his family. We'll be very careful, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. It was the first time I'd spoken. I'm sorry, Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension. I stood up slowly, gathering my purse. I said, be very careful, because if you contest this will, if you drag your father's memory through the mud with baseless accusations, I will defend myself. And trust me, Victoria, you don't want that. Is that a threat? It's a promise. I looked at each of them in turn. You've spent 12 years judging me without knowing a single fact about who I am. You've called me names, excluded me from family events, and treated me like garbage. I tolerated it because Richard loved you and I loved him. I walked toward the door, then turned back. But Richard is gone now. and I don't have to tolerate anything anymore. So if you want a war, Victoria, bring it on, but I guarantee you won't like how it ends." I left the conference room with my head held high. Behind me, I heard Victoria say, "Did she just threaten us?" And Walter Patterson replied dryly, "I believe she just promised you something. There's a difference." 2 weeks later, I received the formal notice. Victoria, Marcus, and James Hamilton were contesting Richard's will on grounds of undue influence, diminished capacity, and fraud. The lawsuit made headlines. Widow accused of manipulating dying billionaire. Gold digger gets millions while real family left behind. Second wife steals fortune from grieving children. My phone rang constantly with reporters wanting comments. I didn't answer. Instead, I called my attorney. His name was David Chen, and he was the best litigation attorney in New York. I'd used him once before during the sale of my company. He was brilliant, ruthless, and expensive. "Gloria," he said when I walked into his office, "I've been reading about your case in the papers. This is going to be ugly." "I know. They're going to make you out to be a villain. They're going to dig into every aspect of your life. They're going to try to destroy you publicly." "Let them try," he raised an eyebrow. "You seem remarkably calm." "That's because I have something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "And evidence." David opened the folder. His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. Bank statements showing my personal net worth, $180 million. Tax returns from the past 12 years showing I'd paid for exactly half of all household expenses. The prenuptial agreement explicitly stating separate property. Receipts showing I'd donated over $20 million to charity in the past decade, all my own money. Records showing I'd never once accessed Richard's accounts. And photos. Hundreds of photos of Richard and me, traveling, volunteering, laughing, living. Photos his children never saw because they never bothered to visit. David looked up at me with something like awe. "You're not a gold digger." "No," I said calmly, "I'm not." "You're actually wealthier than Richard was. By about $50 million, yes." He started laughing. He couldn't help it. "Oh, this is going to be fun. They have no idea what they've walked into, do they?" "Not a clue." "Gloria, when do you want me to reveal this information?" I thought about it. "Not yet. Let them build their case. Let them call all their witnesses. Let them paint me as the villain, and then, right when they think they've won, you pull the rug out from under them." "Exactly," David grinned. "I love the way you think." The trial began on a cold November morning. The courtroom was packed, reporters, curious onlookers, and Richard's former business associates all crammed into the gallery. Victoria's attorney, a sharp-suited man named Gerald Whitmore, was expensive and aggressive. He'd built a career on high-profile estate cases. His opening statement was brutal. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a vulnerable man who was manipulated by a calculating woman." Richard Hamilton was grieving the loss of his beloved wife when Gloria Westfield entered his life. She saw an opportunity, a wealthy, lonely widower, and she took it. Over the course of 12 years, she systematically isolated Mr. Hamilton from his children. She poisoned his mind against his own family. She convinced him to rewrite his will in her favor, and when he suffered a catastrophic stroke, she made the decision to end his life so she could inherit his fortune faster. This is not a love story. This is theft. This is manipulation. This is fraud. The jury looked at me with suspicion. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded, my expression neutral. David stood for our opening statement. "Members of the jury, Mr. Whitmore just told you a story. A compelling story, a story about a gold digger and a victim. But here's the thing about stories, they're only as good as the facts behind them. And the facts in this case, they're going to shock you. By the end of this trial, you're going to learn that nothing, absolutely nothing, Mr. Whitmore just told you is true. Gloria Westfield Hamilton is not who they say she is. And the real question you'll have to answer is this. Why are these adult children so desperate to take money from a woman who never wanted it in the first place?" Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria's side called witness after witness. A former housekeeper testified that she'd heard me arguing with Richard about money. David got her to admit on cross-examination that the argument was me insisting on paying for groceries. A neighbor testified that he rarely saw Richard's children visit after the marriage. David got him to admit they rarely visited before the marriage either. A business associate testified that Richard seemed different after marrying me, quieter, more withdrawn. David showed photos of Richard at charity events, business meetings, and family gatherings looking happy and engaged. Then they called Victoria to the stand. She was poised and articulate, playing the role of grieving daughter perfectly. My father changed after he met her, Victoria testified, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. He stopped calling us, stopped inviting us to holidays. It was like she built a wall between him and his real family. And what about his final days? Gerald asked gently. Who made the decision to end your father's life support? She did, Victoria said, her voice breaking. We wanted more time, we wanted to try everything, but she insisted on pulling the plug. Why do you think she did that? Because she wanted him dead so she could inherit. Gasps from the gallery. The jury looked horrified. David stood for cross-examination. He walked slowly toward the witness stand, his expression thoughtful. Miss Hamilton, you testified that your father changed after meeting Gloria, correct? Yes. He stopped inviting you to holidays? That's right. David pulled out a stack of papers. I have here copies of emails from Richard Hamilton to you, your brothers, and various family members. Invitations to Thanksgiving dinner 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. Invitations to Christmas, invitations to birthdays, invitations to anniversary celebrations. He held them up. 37 invitations over 12 years. How many did you accept? Victoria's face went red. We were busy. For 12 years, you were too busy to visit your father even once? We visited. When? Give me one specific date when you visited your father at his home after his marriage to Gloria. Silence. Can't remember one. Not even one visit in 12 years? We saw him at his office. I didn't ask where you saw him, I asked when you visited his home. The answer is never, isn't it? That's because she made us feel unwelcome. David walked back to our table and picked up another document. This is your father's living will, signed 8 years before he met Gloria. It explicitly states his wishes regarding end-of-life care. Would you like me to read it? I know what it says. Then you know Gloria was following his wishes exactly when she honored his DNR. She didn't want him dead for the money, she wanted to respect his dignity. Victoria's eyes filled with real tears now, not the performance tears from earlier but genuine, painful tears. She took him from us, she whispered. No, Miss Hamilton, David said gently, you gave him away. On the morning of day 14, it was my turn to testify. I wore a simple gray suit and minimal jewelry. I tied my hair back and wore no makeup except a little lipstick. I wanted the jury to see me as I was. Ordinary, honest, real. Gerald Whitmore came at me hard. Mrs. Hamilton, what did you do for a living before you met Richard? I was semi-retired. Semi-retired from what? I owned a business. I sold it. What kind of business? A data analytics firm. And how much did you sell it for? Here it was. The moment I looked directly at the jury. After taxes and expenses, I personally netted $180 million. The courtroom exploded. People gasped, reporters scrambled for their phones. Victoria's face went completely white. The judge banged his gavel. Order, order in this court. Gerald Whitmore stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. He recovered quickly. You expect us to believe you're worth $180 million? I don't expect you to believe anything. I have documentation. Bank statements, tax returns, investment portfolios. It's all been submitted to the court. If you're so wealthy, why did you marry Richard Hamilton? Because I loved him, I said simply. I didn't need his money, I had my own. I married him because he made me laugh, because he was kind. Because he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. Yet you accepted $15 million from his estate. He wanted me to have it, I didn't ask for it. Convenient? Actually, I said, it's irrelevant. Because I'm donating it. Another explosion of whispers. Gerald's eyes narrowed. Donating it? Yes, the entire $15 million to the Richard Hamilton Foundation for Youth Entrepreneurship. A foundation I'm establishing in his name to mentor young business owners. It's what he would have wanted. David stood. Your Honor, we'd like to submit Mrs. Hamilton's complete financial records into evidence. The judge nodded. Accepted. Over the next hour, David systematically destroyed every claim Victoria's side had made. He showed that I'd paid for exactly half of everything during my marriage to Richard. He showed that I'd donated over $20 million to charity over the past decade. He showed that I had my own apartment in Greenwich Village, which I'd kept throughout the marriage, giving me complete independence. He showed that I'd never accessed Richard's accounts, never taken money from his business, never benefited financially from our relationship in any way. And then he showed the photos. Hundreds of them. Richard and me at soup kitchens. Richard and me fostering rescue dogs. Richard and me reading to children at the hospital. Richard and me holding hands at the park, at museums, at concerts. Richard looking happy, truly, deeply happy. The prosecution claims Gloria isolated Richard from his family, David said to the jury. But the evidence shows something different. It shows Richard lived his last 12 years surrounded by love, by purpose, by joy. He wasn't isolated, he was free. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood up. She was a black woman in her 60s, a retired teacher, and she'd watched the entire trial with sharp, intelligent eyes. In the matter of the contest of Richard Hamilton's will, she read, "We find in favor of the defendant, Gloria Westfield Hamilton. We find no evidence of undue influence, fraud, or diminished capacity. The will stands as written." Victoria let out a sob. Marcus put his head in his hands. James just stared straight ahead, his face expressionless. The judge banged his gavel. "The will is upheld. This court is adjourned." I stood up and David shook my hand. "Congratulations, Gloria." "Thank you," I said quietly. As I walked toward the exit, Victoria suddenly appeared in front of me, her face ravaged with tears and rage. "You destroyed us," she hissed. "You took our father and now you've taken our dignity." I looked at her for a long moment. "Victoria, I didn't take anything from you. Your father loved you. He left you his company, his legacy, millions of dollars. All I ever took was his loneliness, and I gave him happiness in return. He would have been happy with us if you hadn't, would he?" I interrupted. 37 invitations, Victoria. He reached out 37 times and you said no every single time. He died wondering why his children didn't want him anymore. And you want to blame me for that? She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "I loved your father," I said quietly. "I wish you had too." I walked past her and out into the cold November air where reporters were waiting with cameras and microphones. "Mrs. Hamilton, how do you feel about the verdict? Are you really donating the money? What do you want to say to Richard Hamilton's children?" I stopped and turned to face the cameras. "I want to say this. Richard Hamilton was a brilliant, generous, loving man. He spent his life building businesses, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and giving back to his community. He deserved to be remembered for those things, not for a family fight over money that he never even wanted." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "To his children, I want you to know your father never stopped loving you. Every holiday you declined, every invitation you ignored, it broke his heart a little more. But he kept trying. He kept hoping. He kept reaching out. And I'm sorry that pride and prejudice kept you from seeing how much he needed you." A reporter called out, "What will you do now?" I smiled. "I'm going to honor my husband's memory. I'm going to build that foundation. And I'm going to live the rest of my life knowing that I loved a good man and was loved by him in return. That's more valuable than any inheritance." I walked away, leaving them with their cameras and questions. 3 months after the trial, I sold Richard's penthouse. It was too big, too full of memories, and honestly, too much like a mausoleum. I moved back to my brownstone in Greenwich Village, the home I'd kept all these years. I spent my days setting up the Richard Hamilton Foundation for Youth Entrepreneurship. We created mentorship programs, business incubators, and scholarship funds. Within 6 months, we'd helped launch 15 new businesses and provided full scholarships to 30 young entrepreneurs. I named the board members carefully. Successful business owners who'd overcome adversity, who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. People Richard would have respected. I didn't hear from Victoria, Marcus, or James. Not a word. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. Until one day, about 4 months after the trial, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find James standing on my doorstep. He looked terrible, thinner, older, with dark circles under his eyes. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. We sat in my living room, an awkward silence stretching between us. Finally, he spoke. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice hoarse. "Something I should have said a long time ago. What is it? I'm sorry. He looked up at me, his eyes red. I'm sorry for how we treated you. I'm sorry we never gave you a chance. I'm sorry we wasted 12 years being angry instead of getting to know you. I said nothing, just waited. After the trial, he continued, I started going through Dad's things, his office, his computer, his journals, and I found letters, dozens of them, letters he wrote to us but never sent. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. I opened it, Richard's handwriting, shaky but clear. Dear James, I don't know how to reach you anymore. Every time I try, you pull away. Every invitation is declined. Every attempt at conversation is met with coldness. I know you think Gloria came between us, but that's not true. The distance was there long before she arrived. You stopped needing me years ago when you grew up and built your own life. And that's as it should be. I'm proud of you. But I still needed you. I needed my son. And when you rejected Gloria, you rejected the happiness I finally found after your mother died. I wish you could have seen how she cares for me, how she makes me laugh, how she never asks for anything but gives everything. She's not replacing your mother, no one could, but she's made my life worth living again. I hope someday you'll understand. Love, Dad. I folded the letter carefully and handed it back to James. My eyes were wet. There are dozens more, James said, his voice breaking. To Victoria, to Marcus, to all of us. He poured his heart out in these letters and we never knew, we never gave him the chance to tell us. Why are you telling me this now? I asked gently. Because I need to know, he said, looking at me directly. Did he die happy? In those last 12 years, was he actually happy? I thought about it. About lazy Sunday mornings reading the paper together. About Richard laughing at my terrible cooking attempts. About him falling asleep during movies with his head on my shoulder. About him squeezing my hand at the symphony. About him saying, I love you every single night before bed. Yes, I said softly. He was happy. Truly happy? James nodded, tears streaming down his face. Thank you for giving him that. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. The foundation you're building, the one in his name, do you need help? I'm not asking for credit or recognition, I want to do something that would make him proud. I studied him for a moment. This broken man who'd wasted years on resentment and was now trying to find his way back to his father's memory. Yes, I said, I could use help, especially from someone who knew him as long as you did. James nodded. I'll call you next week, we can discuss details. After he left, I sat by the window and watched the sun set over Greenwich Village. Richard would have loved this view. He would have loved knowing his son was finally coming around. Maybe it was too late for us to be a family, but maybe it wasn't too late to honor the man we'd all loved in our different ways. 6 months after the trial, we held the official launch party for the Richard Hamilton Foundation for Youth Entrepreneurship. We rented out the ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, the same place where Richard and I had celebrated our 5th anniversary. I wore a deep blue dress, simple but elegant, and Richard's favorite pearl necklace. Over 300 people attended, business leaders, young entrepreneurs, reporters, philanthropists. And standing near the back, almost hiding, were Victoria, Marcus, and James. I hadn't invited them, but James had come anyway and apparently convinced his siblings to join him. When it was time for speeches, I stepped up to the podium. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. Richard Hamilton believed that everyone deserved a chance, I began. He believed that talent and drive mattered more than privilege or pedigree. He spent his life proving that through his own success and then spent his later years helping others achieve theirs. I paused, looking out at the crowd. Richard wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He had regrets. But he never stopped trying to be better, to do better, to give more. And that's the legacy I want this foundation to honor. I talked about the programs we'd launched, the businesses we'd helped fund, the scholarships we'd awarded. I introduced 3 young entrepreneurs who'd benefited from our mentorship program and were now running successful companies. Then I said something I hadn't planned. Richard's children are here tonight, I said, looking directly at Victoria, Marcus, and James. And I want to acknowledge them. Despite our differences, despite the pain we've all experienced, they loved their father, and he loved them. Nothing that happened in these past years changes that. Victoria's face crumpled. She covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. This foundation isn't about me, I continued. It's not even really about Richard. It's about making sure his values, hard work, generosity, second chances live on. And I hope his children will join me in that mission. After the speeches, after the applause, after most of the guests had left, Victoria approached me. Her eyes were red and swollen, her carefully applied makeup completely destroyed. "I don't know how to apologize for what we did," she said, her voice raw. "I don't even know if I can." "You don't have to apologize," I said quietly. "You lost your mother and then you felt like you were losing your father. I understand that. But we didn't lose him, we pushed him away, and then we tried to destroy you for loving him." She laughed bitterly. "God, we were so stupid, so blind." "You were grieving," I said. "Grief makes us do terrible things sometimes." She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in 12 years. "Who are you, really?" I smiled. "I'm just a woman who loved your father. That's all I ever was." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're more than that. You built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. You're worth more than our entire family combined. You could have destroyed us during that trial, humiliated us publicly, made us look like fools, but you didn't. What would be the point?" I asked. "Your father loved you. Hurting you would have dishonored his memory." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to help with the foundation. I'm a corporate attorney. I could help with legal structure, governance, compliance issues. I wouldn't take a salary, I need to do something that would make him proud." I thought about it. About all the years of cruelty, the accusations, the trial. About whether I could really work alongside this woman who'd tried so hard to destroy me. Then I thought about Richard, about how much he'd wanted his children to be part of his life. About how he'd kept reaching out, kept hoping, kept loving them even when they pushed him away. "Okay," I said, "let's set up a meeting next week." Victoria's face transformed. She smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time since I'd known her. "Thank you, you're far more gracious than I deserve." "Maybe," I agreed. But Richard believed in second chances. I guess some of that rubbed off on me. A year after Richard's death, I stood in the cemetery where he was buried, holding a bouquet of white roses, his favorite. The headstone was simple, elegant. Richard James Hamilton, beloved father, husband, mentor. He believed in second chances. I placed the roses at the base of the stone and sat down on the bench nearby. "Hi, sweetheart," I said quietly as if he could hear me. "I thought you'd want to know what's been happening." I told him about the foundation, about how we'd helped launch over 50 businesses in the past year, about the scholarships we'd awarded, about the lives we'd changed. "And your kids," I continued, smiling through tears. "They're actually helping now. Victoria's on the board, James runs the mentorship program. Even Marcus donated a substantial amount last month. I think they're finally starting to understand what you were trying to teach them all along." A soft breeze rustled through the trees. I imagined it was Richard, listening, approving. "I miss you," I whispered, "every single day. But I'm not angry anymore. At them, at the situation, at any of it. Life's too short for anger, you taught me that." I stood up to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Richard, that prenup you didn't want me to sign. That ended up being the thing that proved I loved you for you, not your money, so I guess I was right after all." I could almost hear him laughing at that. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Foundation board meeting tomorrow at 10. Can you make it?" I typed back, "I'll be there." Another text came through, this time from James. "Dad would be proud of what you've built. Thank you for not giving up on us." I didn't respond to that one, just held the phone and let the tears come, the good kind this time, because here's what I'd learned through all of this. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who are hurting the most themselves. Sometimes what looks like cruelty is really just fear. And sometimes, if you give them enough time and space and grace, people can surprise you by becoming better than they were. Richard knew that. He'd built his whole philosophy around second chances. And in the end, he was right. 2 years after Richard's death, the New York Times ran a feature story about the foundation. The headline read, "From courtroom to boardroom, how a controversial widow turned tragedy into triumph." The article detailed the trial, the accusations, and the dramatic revelation of my wealth. But it focused primarily on what came after. They interviewed Victoria, who said, "I spent years seeing Gloria as the enemy. It took losing a court case and finding my father's letters to realize she was the only one who truly saw him for who he was." She's taught me more about grace and forgiveness than I ever learned in church. They interviewed Marcus, who'd quietly donated over $5 million to the foundation over 2 years. My father always said that integrity means doing the right thing even when it costs you something. Gloria embodied that in a way I didn't understand until it was almost too late. They interviewed James, who now ran the mentorship program full-time, having left his corporate job to do so. Gloria didn't just love my father, she understood him, and now she's making sure his values outlive him. That's the greatest gift anyone could give our family. And they interviewed me. Mrs. Hamilton, the reporter asked, after everything you went through, the accusations, the trial, the public humiliation, why didn't you just walk away? Why fight so hard to preserve Richard's memory? I thought about it for a moment. Because he deserved better than to be remembered as a man who was manipulated, I said. He was brilliant, generous, and kind. He spent his life helping people, and I wasn't going to let anyone reduce him to a cautionary tale about old men and gold diggers. What do you want people to know about second marriages later in life? I want people to know that love doesn't have an age limit. That companionship and partnership matter just as much at 70 as they do at 25. And that sometimes the greatest love story isn't about passion. It's about finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, and chooses to stand beside you anyway. And what about Richard's children? Have you forgiven them? Forgiveness isn't something you give once and it's done, I said. It's something you choose every day. Do I forgive them? Yes. But more importantly, we're building something together now, something meaningful. That matters more than forgiveness. The article ended with a photo of me, Victoria, Marcus, and James standing together at the foundation's office, all of us smiling. The caption read, "The Hamilton family redefined." 3 years after Richard's death, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Stage 2, treatable but serious. I needed surgery and chemotherapy, and the prognosis was uncertain. I didn't tell anyone at first, just went to my appointments, met with my doctors, and quietly prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. But Victoria found out. She'd stopped by my brownstone unannounced, something she did now, occasionally, usually bearing expensive coffee and wanting to discuss foundation business, and saw the hospital paperwork on my kitchen table. "Gloria," she said, her voice tight with concern. "What is this?" I considered lying, then decided against it. "Breast cancer, I'm having surgery next month." Her face went pale. "Does anyone else know?" "No. And I'd appreciate if you didn't tell them. I don't want to be anyone's burden." Victoria set down her coffee very carefully, as if she was afraid she might break something. "Gloria, do you remember what you said to me at the foundation launch, about how I loved my father even though I hurt him?" I nodded. "You were wrong," she said quietly. "I didn't love him, not the way he deserved. I loved the idea of him, the version of him that fit into my story. But the real him, the man who found happiness with you, I rejected that man because he didn't match my narrative." She sat down across from me, her eyes filling with tears. "Don't make the same mistake I did," she said. "Don't push us away because you think you're protecting us. Let us love you. Let us be there for you. Let us be the family we should have been from the beginning." I felt tears rolling down my cheeks. "Victoria, I know you don't need us," she interrupted. "You don't need anyone. You've spent your whole life being strong and independent and completely self-sufficient. But here's what I learned from losing my father. Needing people isn't weakness, it's what makes us human." So I let them in. Victoria drove me to chemotherapy appointments. James cooked meals and left them on my doorstep with little notes. Marcus hired a cleaning service for my house and paid for a year in advance. They visited, they called, they checked in constantly, sometimes annoyingly so, and slowly, painfully, we became something we'd never been before, a family. The surgery was successful. The chemotherapy was brutal but effective. By the end of the year, I was in remission. On the first anniversary of my cancer-free status, Victoria, Marcus, and James threw me a surprise party at the foundation's office. They'd invited everyone, foundation board members, scholarship recipients, business mentees, old colleagues from my company days, neighbors, friends. Over 100 people showed up. "Speech," someone called out. I stood up, feeling overwhelmed and grateful and still a little weak from everything my body had been through. "I don't usually like being the center of attention," I began, and everyone laughed because they knew it was true. "But I want to say something important." I looked around the room at all these faces, all these people whose lives had intersected with mine in meaningful ways. 4 years ago, I sat in the back row of my husband's funeral and thought my life was over. I'd lost the man I loved, I was being accused of terrible things, and I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Victoria wiped her eyes. James had his arm around Marcus's shoulder. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to something better. The trial forced me to reveal who I really was. That revelation forced Richard's children to confront their assumptions. And eventually, all of that pain and conflict transformed into something none of us expected: genuine connection. I paused, my voice thick with emotion. Richard used to say that second chances are what make life worth living. I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but now I do. We all deserve second chances. The chance to be better than we were, the chance to love more bravely, the chance to forgive and be forgiven. I looked directly at Victoria, Marcus, and James. Thank you for giving me that chance. Thank you for becoming the family your father always hoped you'd be. The room erupted in applause. Victoria crossed the room and hugged me tightly, both of us crying. Thank you for not giving up on us, she whispered. Even when we gave you every reason to. 5 years after Richard's death, I stood at a podium in Harvard Business School, invited to give a guest lecture on entrepreneurship and second-act careers. The auditorium was packed with eager young faces, all of them looking at me expectantly, waiting for wisdom about how to build successful businesses. Instead, I told them about Richard. About meeting him in the rain, about coffee that turned into love, about 12 years of happiness. About his children who hated me, about the trial that nearly destroyed me, about the revelation that changed everything. Here's what I want you to understand, I said, looking out at those young, ambitious faces. Success isn't just about building businesses or making money. Success is about becoming the kind of person who can love generously, forgive freely, and extend grace even when it costs you something. I paused. Richard taught me that, not through words, but through the way he loved me even when his children rejected him for it. Through the way he kept reaching out even when they pushed him away. Through the way he believed in second chances even when it seemed hopeless. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Mrs. Hamilton, do you regret marrying him, knowing what it would cost you? I smiled. That's easy. Not for a single second. Because those 12 years of love, of partnership, of genuine connection, they were worth every moment of pain that came after. They were worth the trial, the accusations, even the loneliness. Because I got to love a good man and be loved by him in return, and that's worth everything. After the lecture, as I was gathering my things, a young man approached me. He looked nervous, holding a worn copy of a business magazine with my picture on the cover. Mrs. Hamilton, I just wanted to say thank you, he said. Your story about being judged for something you're not, about proving people wrong, about building something meaningful out of pain, it really resonated with me. Why's that? I asked gently. Because I'm about to marry someone my family doesn't approve of. They think she's after my family's money, but she's not. She's brilliant and kind, and she loves me for me. And hearing your story gives me hope that eventually my family will see what I see. I looked at this young man, so earnest and hopeful, and saw myself and Richard reflected back at me. Here's my advice, I said. Love her openly and without apology. Build a life that reflects both of your values, and give your family time to come around. But more importantly, make sure you're seeing her clearly. Make sure you're not just rebelling against your family, but genuinely building a partnership with someone who sees you and supports you. He nodded seriously. Thank you. That's exactly what I needed to hear. As I walked out of Harvard Business School into the crisp autumn air, my phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Foundation Gala is in 2 weeks. Please tell me you haven't forgotten. I smiled and texted back, how could I forget? I planned it. Another text came through, this time from James, bringing my new girlfriend to the gala, don't embarrass me. And one from Marcus. Can you believe it's been 5 years? Dad would be so proud of what we've built. I stood there on the sidewalk, reading these messages from people who once hated me, who now felt like family, and I thought about how strange life is. How tragedy can transform into triumph. How enemies can become allies. How the worst moment of your life can somehow lead to the best. The Richard Hamilton Foundation had now helped launch over 200 businesses. We'd awarded scholarships to over 500 students. We'd created a network of mentors and entrepreneurs that was changing lives across the country. And Richard's children, the ones who'd once called me a gold digger and tried to take everything from me, were now my partners in keeping his legacy alive. Would I have chosen this path? No, the pain was too great, the cost too high. But would I change it? Also no. Because sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is prove people wrong, not out of spite, but out of love. Love for yourself, love for the person you lost, and eventually, if you're very lucky, love for the people who hurt you. Richard was right. Second chances are what make life worth living. And I'd been given more second chances than I probably deserved. So there you have it, darlings, the story of how the gold digger turned out to be worth more than the gold. Did this story touch your heart? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. Here's what I want you to take away from Gloria's story. Never let anyone define you by what they think you are. Gloria could have fought back immediately, could have shouted about her wealth from day one, could have humiliated Richard's children the moment they started their attacks. But she didn't, because she knew something they didn't. The truth always comes out. Always. And when it does, it's so much more powerful when you've had the grace and dignity to wait for the right moment. Victoria, Marcus, and James spent 12 years judging a woman they never bothered to know. They saw what they wanted to see: a gold digger, a manipulator, a threat. And in doing so, they wasted 12 years they could have spent knowing their father's happiness. 12 years of Sunday dinners they declined. 12 years of memories they'll never get back. That's the real tragedy of this story, not the trial, not the accusations, but the lost time. The moments that could have been beautiful if pride hadn't stood in the way. But here's the beautiful part: it's never too late. Gloria could have held onto her anger forever. Could have rejected Victoria's apology, refused James's help, kept Marcus at arm's length. She would have been justified. Instead, she chose grace. She chose to honor the man she loved by embodying the values he believed in. Second chances, forgiveness, and the belief that people can change if you give them room to grow. If you've been the Gloria in someone's life, judged unfairly, accused falsely, treated like you're less, then hold your head high. Your truth will vindicate you. Your character will speak for itself. And the people who matter will eventually see you for who you really are. And if you've been the Victoria, if you've judged someone without knowing their full story, if you've let prejudice cloud your vision, if you've hurt someone because of your own pain, it's not too late. The road to reconciliation starts with 2 words: I'm sorry. And it continues with action, showing up, doing the work, proving you've changed. Gloria didn't need Richard's money. She didn't need his children's approval. She didn't need anything from anyone, but she chose love anyway. She chose connection. She chose to build something meaningful out of loss, and in the end, she didn't just win the trial. She won something much more valuable. A family that finally learned what their father had known all along: that this woman was worth knowing, worth loving, worth honoring. If this story resonated with you, if you've been misjudged, or if you've done the misjudging, share your story in the comments. Your truth might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. You can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep creating content like this. Thank you for your sweet support. I look forward to reading your comments on this story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect. This is Auntie Rose reminding you, sometimes the people who call you a gold digger are really just mad they can't afford you. Sometimes the greatest revenge is living well and loving better. And sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the person who changes everything. Never let anyone make you small because they can't see your worth. And never stop believing in second chances, because we all deserve them and we all need them. Until next time, darlings.